The morning of December 16th, 1944, near Malmédy, Belgium, Oberfeldwebel Klaus Herrmann watched the column of American vehicles approaching down the snow-covered road. His MG-42 machine gun team had taken position in the tree line overlooking the crossroads, part of Kampfgruppe Paper's advance through the Ardennes. The vehicles were moving slowly, carefully, typical American caution. Supply trucks, mostly, some jeeps, the usual soft targets his unit had been ambushing since the offensive began 3 days earlier. Then he saw it. A half-track, unremarkable at first glance, painted in the standard olive drab that marked every American vehicle. But something was different about this one. Where most American half-tracks carried infantry or towed guns, this vehicle mounted something in the back that made Herman pause. A turret. Not the single machine gun mount he'd seen on other half-tracks, but a proper, rotating turret with multiple barrels pointing in different directions. 4 barrels, he counted. Heavy weapons, probably .50 caliber, the Americans' standard heavy machine gun. His squad leader, Hauptfeldwebel Schmidt, had seen them before. During the retreat through France in the summer, his previous unit had encountered these vehicles. Schmidt had called them Fleischwolf, meat grinder. Other veterans used different terms. Hackfleisch, minced meat. The names varied, but the meaning was consistent. These half-tracks were dangerous in ways that transcended their simple appearance. Herman didn't fully understand the warning. A half-track was still a half-track. Thin armor, if it had any armor at all. Vulnerable to Panzerfausts, to anti-tank rifles, to any serious weapon. The machine guns it carried were impressive in number, certainly, but machine guns were defensive weapons. Useful for suppressing infantry. For air defense, perhaps, but not something that would change the tactical situation. His MG-42 could fire 1,200 rounds per minute. Whatever those American guns could do, his weapon could match. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Schmidt ordered the squad to hold fire. Let the column pass, he said. Don't engage the half-track directly. Herman thought this was excessive caution. They had good positions, clear fields of fire, and the element of surprise. But Schmidt was insistent, almost anxious. He had seen what these vehicles could do. Herman had not. The column continued past their position. Herman watched the half-track roll by, its turret rotating slowly as if scanning for threats. The crew inside were visible, exposed above the armor line, wearing their distinctive American helmets. They looked relaxed, almost casual, as if they were driving through peaceful countryside rather than contested territory in the middle of a major offensive. After the Americans passed, Herman asked Schmidt what made these half-tracks so dangerous. Schmidt's answer was simple and direct. The rate of fire, he said. The Americans had found a way to put 4 heavy machine guns on a single mount, all firing together. When that turret opened up, everything in front of it died. Infantry in the open lasted seconds. Infantry in cover lasted minutes. Light vehicles were torn apart. Even armored vehicles could be damaged, vision ports destroyed, commanders killed if they were exposed. But it was more than just firepower, Schmidt explained. It was the psychological effect. The sound of 450 caliber machine guns firing simultaneously was unlike anything else on the battlefield. It created a continuous roar that drowned out other sounds, that made communication impossible, that filled the air with so much lead that attempting to advance became suicidal. German infantry who encountered these vehicles learned quickly to avoid them, to call for armor support, to find another route. Engaging them directly with small arms was pointless. Herman absorbed this information, but remained skeptical. He had fought the Americans in Normandy, had seen their infantry break under concentrated MG-42 fire, had watched their armor withdraw when faced with determined resistance. The Americans had material superiority, certainly. Everyone knew that. But material superiority didn't make them invincible. The vehicle Herman had watched roll past was designated the M16 multiple-gun motor carriage. Its development began not with grand strategic planning, but with a practical problem that emerged early in America's involvement in World War II. The problem was simple. American forces needed mobile anti-aircraft protection that could keep pace with mechanized columns. In 1941, before Pearl Harbor, the United States Army recognized that modern warfare required mobile air defense. German Stuka dive bombers had devastated Polish and French forces. The Luftwaffe had demonstrated the vulnerability of troops and vehicles caught in the open without air cover. American military planners understood that any future conflict would involve air attack against ground forces, and stationary anti-aircraft guns would be inadequate. The Army's Ordnance Department began exploring options for mounting anti-aircraft weapons on mobile platforms. The obvious choice was the half-track, a vehicle that combined the mobility of wheeled vehicles on roads with the cross-country capability of tracked vehicles. The M3 half-track was already in production, serving as an armoured personnel carrier and general utility vehicle. It had proven mechanically reliable and was being manufactured in large numbers. The weapon system selected was the Browning M250 caliber machine gun, the same weapon that would later prove so effective against Japanese tanks in the Pacific. The M2 had been designed near the end of World War I, refined through the 1920s and 30s, and had entered service as the standard American heavy machine gun. It fired a 12.7mm round at a muzzle velocity exceeding 2,900 feet per second. Against aircraft, it was effective at ranges up to 1,000 yards. Against ground targets, it was devastating. But a single .50 caliber gun, even one as effective as the M2, had limitations. Rate of fire was good at 450 to 600 rounds per minute, but not overwhelming. A single gun could be suppressed by return fire, could malfunction, could run out of ammunition at critical moments. The solution was to mount multiple guns on a single platform. Maxon Motor Company, a Detroit-based manufacturer, had developed an electrically powered turret mount that could carry multiple machine guns. The mount allowed the guns to be aimed together, elevated and traversed as a unit, with the gunner controlling all weapons simultaneously. This was not a new concept. Multiple gun mounts had existed for years, used primarily on naval vessels and static installations. But Maxon had created a version light enough and compact enough to be mounted on a vehicle. The first prototype mounts carried two .50 caliber guns. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland demonstrated the concept was sound. The mount worked reliably. The electrical traverse system functioned properly. The guns could fire together without jamming or interfering with each other. But Army evaluators wanted more firepower. If 2 guns were good, would 4 guns be better? Maxon designed a new mount, the M45, which carried 4 M2 machine guns in a compact turret. The guns were arranged in a square pattern, 2 on each side, all aimed forward. The entire assembly weighed approximately 1,000 pounds, light enough to be mounted on a half-track without overloading the vehicle's suspension. The turret could rotate 360 degrees and could elevate from -5 degrees to +90 degrees, allowing it to engage both ground and air targets. In 1943, production began at White Motor Company's facilities in Cleveland, Ohio. The M16 multiple-gun motor carriage combined the M3 half-track chassis with the Maxon M45 turret mount. The resulting vehicle was not aesthetically impressive. It looked exactly like what it was, a standard half-track with a turret bolted onto the back. But the capabilities were extraordinary. The combined rate of fire from 4 M2 machine guns firing together was 1,800 to 2,400 rounds per minute. This was comparable to the German MG42, the fastest-firing machine gun of the war. But where the MG42 fired a rifle-caliber round, the M16 fired .50 caliber ammunition, each round carrying vastly more kinetic energy and capable of penetrating light armor and fortifications. The ammunition storage on the M16 consisted of 5,000 rounds, carried in ammunition cans positioned around the turret for Easy access. At maximum rate of fire, this represented approximately 2 minutes of continuous firing. In practice, gunners fired in bursts to conserve ammunition and prevent barrel overheating, extending combat endurance considerably. Additional ammunition could be carried in the vehicle's interior, and resupply from accompanying trucks was standard procedure. The crew consisted of 5 men. The driver and assistant driver sat in the front cab, operating the vehicle and maintaining communication with the commander. The commander and 2 gunners operated the turret. 1 man served as primary gunner, controlling the elevation and traverse of the mount through an electrical control system. The other assisted with ammunition loading, barrel changes when necessary, and target acquisition. The commander directed fire and coordinated with other vehicles or ground units. The M16's armor protection was minimal, identical to the standard M3 half-track. The front plate was 1/4-inch steel, angled to provide some ballistic protection against small arms fire and shrapnel. The sides were slightly thinner. The rear was open, providing no protection at all. This was intentional. The vehicle was designed for mobility and firepower, not survivability. It was meant to engage aircraft at distance and suppress ground targets from beyond effective small arms range. Maximum speed on roads was 45 miles per hour. Cross-country speed depended on terrain but typically ranged from 15 to 25 miles per hour. Range on internal fuel was approximately 200 miles on roads, less on rough terrain. The White 160 AX 6-cylinder engine produced 147 horsepower, adequate for the vehicle's weight of approximately 9 tons when fully loaded. Production numbers reflected American industrial capacity. White Motor Company built 2,876 M16 vehicles between 1943 and 1945. This represented a small fraction of overall half-track production, which exceeded 41,000 vehicles during the war. But it was sufficient to equip anti-aircraft artillery battalions across all theatres of operation. The vehicles entered service first in North Africa and Italy, where they provided air defence for advancing columns during the campaigns of 1943 and 1944. Their primary mission was exactly what the designers intended: shooting down German aircraft attacking American forces. The Quad 50 mount proved highly effective against low-flying aircraft, particularly the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers that had been so devastating earlier in the war. But crews quickly discovered the M16 had capabilities beyond its designed mission. The concentrated firepower of 4 heavy machine guns made it extraordinarily effective against ground targets. German infantry positions could be suppressed or destroyed. Light vehicles could be disabled or destroyed. Buildings could be reduced to rubble. The psychological impact on enemy troops was significant, as Schmidt had tried to explain to Herman. By December of 1944, when the German Ardennes offensive began, M16 vehicles had been in European service for nearly 6 months following the Normandy invasion. The 413th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion, equipped with M16 seconds among other weapons, had landed in France in July and had been providing air defence for First Army units throughout the advance across France and into Belgium. The battalion's official mission remained air defence. Each battery consisted of multiple M16 vehicles positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire against aircraft approaching American columns or assembly areas. Standard doctrine called for the vehicles to be positioned on high ground when possible, with clear sight lines to the sky, ready to engage enemy aircraft at ranges up to 1,000 yards. But the Luftwaffe in late 1944 was not the Luftwaffe of 1940 or 1941. German air power had been systematically destroyed through attrition in the east and losses to American and British strategic bombing and fighter operations. By the winter of 1944 to 1945, German aircraft rarely appeared over American positions in strength. When they did appear, they came at night or in conditions of poor visibility, making engagement difficult. This left the M16 crews with capable weapons and few opportunities to employ them in their designed role. Commanders at battalion and company level began authorizing the use of M16 seconds in ground support missions. This was not official doctrine. Army field manuals did not address using anti-aircraft vehicles as direct fire support weapons, but combat forces improvise, and the M16's firepower was too valuable to leave unused. The effectiveness in the ground role was immediately apparent. During the fighting around Aachen in October of 1944, M16 vehicles supported infantry assaults on fortified German positions. The concentrated fire from 450 caliber guns could destroy machine gun nests, suppress sniper positions, and clear buildings. Commanders who had worked with the M16 inches this role requested their support for subsequent operations. The German troops facing these attacks had varied experiences and capabilities. By late 1944, the Wehrmacht was a mixture of veteran units rebuilt after heavy losses, new formations with limited training, and Volkssturm militia with minimal military capability. But regardless of experience level, German soldiers understood machine gun tactics. They knew how to use cover, how to move under fire, how to suppress enemy positions while maneuvering. The MG-42 machine gun was the foundation of German infantry tactics. Each infantry squad was built around the machine gun, with riflemen supporting the gun team. The MG-42's rate of fire, approximately 1,200 rounds per minute, gave German squads enormous defensive firepower. Allied soldiers who faced MG-42 fire described it as sounding like tearing cloth, a continuous ripping sound, rather than individual shots. German infantry facing American forces had developed tactics for dealing with Browning 50 caliber machine guns. The standard single M2 mount was dangerous but manageable. It had a rate of fire of 450 to 600 rounds per minute, roughly half that of an MG-42. It could be suppressed with rifle fire or engaged with grenades if infantry could close the distance. German troops respected the 50 caliber, but did not fear it the way they feared American artillery or armor. The M16 was different. German soldiers encountering it for the first time did not immediately understand what they were facing. It looked like a standard half-track, a vehicle they had engaged many times. Half-tracks were vulnerable to Panzerfausts, to anti-tank rifles, to concentrated Oberfeldwebel machine gun fire that could kill exposed crews. Standard tactics called for taking them under fire with available weapons. But when the M16's turret opened fire, those standard tactics became suicidal. The volume of fire was overwhelming. Tracer rounds, loaded at intervals in the ammunition belts, created visible streams of fire arcing toward targets. The sound was not the ripping of a single MG-42, but a sustained roar that made verbal communication impossible at combat ranges. Anything caught in the cone of fire disintegrated. Wooden structures were torn apart, individual boards splintering under the impact of dozens of 50 caliber rounds per second. Masonry walls were pitted and holed, mortar between stones pulverized. Earth and sandbag fortifications offered some protection but degraded rapidly under sustained fire. Infantry in the open died instantly, bodies torn apart by multiple impacts. The German experience of encountering M16 fire was consistent across units and theatres. Initial confidence gave way to shock, then to fear, then to the understanding that engaging these vehicles directly with infantry weapons was futile. The accounts from German prisoners of war, interrogated by American intelligence officers after capture, revealed a pattern. A Lancer, a common German infantryman, captured near Saint-Vith in late December 1944, described his unit's first encounter with an M16. His company had been ordered to attack an American position near a road junction. Intelligence reported American infantry with standard support weapons. No armor was mentioned. His company moved forward in standard assault formation, squads advancing by bounds while machine gun teams provided covering fire. The attack began well. American infantry fell back from their initial positions. The Germans advanced, taking cover behind a low ridge, approximately 200 meters from the American line. Then an American half-track moved into position on the road, The Germans prepared to engage it with a Panzerfaust team. Before they could fire, the turret rotated toward their position and opened fire. The Lancer's description was specific. The sound was like thunder, continuous and overwhelming. He could not hear his squad leader shouting orders. The ridge they sheltered behind began to disintegrate, dirt and stones thrown into the air by impacts. Men near him were hit, bodies jerking as bullets struck them. He pressed himself flat against the ground, trying to dig into the earth with his bare hands. The firing continued for what he estimated was 30 seconds, though he admitted time became meaningless. When it stopped, he looked up. Half his squad was dead or wounded. The machine gun team that had been providing covering fire was gone, their weapon destroyed and crew killed. Men were screaming, some from wounds, others from pure terror. The company commander ordered a retreat. No one argued. Another prisoner, an Unteroffizier, a junior NCO, captured near Malmédy in January of 1945, had encountered M16 seconds multiple times. His account was more analytical, informed by repeated experience. He described the M16 as the most dangerous American infantry support weapon, more feared than their tanks because tanks could be avoided or disabled with Panzerfausts. The M16 was faster than tanks, more mobile, and appeared suddenly. He explained that his unit had developed specific procedures for dealing with M16 seconds. Do not engage them with rifles or machine guns. The return fire was too intense, and infantry weapons could not disable the vehicle quickly enough. Call for Panzerfaust teams or anti-tank guns if available. If no heavy weapons were available, withdraw. Do not attempt to hold positions within 500 meters of an M16. The firepower advantage was too great. His description of the weapon's effects was detailed. Against infantry in hasty defensive positions, normal foxholes or shell craters, the M16 could kill or suppress defenders within seconds. The 50 caliber rounds would strike the edge of the foxhole, spalling fragments of rock and frozen earth into the position. Even if the bullets did not penetrate directly, the fragmentation effects caused casualties. Against infantry in buildings, the M16 could destroy the structure, firing through walls and collapsing upper floors. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. He stated that his company had lost more men to M16 fire than to any other single American weapon during the Ardennes fighting. Not in single large casualties like artillery could cause, but through steady attrition. Every time they attempted to hold a position and an M16 appeared, they suffered losses. Eventually, men began abandoning positions when they heard the distinctive sound, before the vehicle even came into view. American after-action reports from the Ardennes offensive confirm the German prisoners' accounts from the opposite perspective. The 413th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion's records for December 1944 through January 1945 document extensive use of M16 vehicles in ground support roles. The battalion engaged enemy aircraft on only 4 occasions during this period. They engaged enemy ground forces on 73 separate occasions. One engagement on December 20th, 1944, near Malmédy, is documented in detail. A platoon of M16 seconds from Battery B was attached to an infantry company tasked with clearing German forces from a village. The infantry commander requested the M16 seconds engage a stone building where German troops had established a defensive position with machine guns covering the main street. 2 M16 vehicles moved into position at a range of approximately 300 meters. The first vehicle opened fire, walking its fire from ground level up the face of the building. The 50 caliber rounds penetrated the stone walls, visible puffs of dust marking each impact. Windows shattered, the wooden shutters disintegrated. The second vehicle engaged the building's upper floor, firing sustained bursts into the structure. The engagement lasted 2 minutes. The M16 crews fired approximately 800 rounds total, 400 rounds per vehicle. When they ceased fire, the building's facade was pockmarked with hundreds of impact craters. Sections of wall had collapsed. The roof had partially caved in. No return fire came from the position. Infantry advanced and found 12 German soldiers dead inside, killed by direct hits or by structural collapse. The battalion commander noted in his report that ammunition expenditure for ground missions was significantly higher than for anti-aircraft missions. Engaging aircraft required short, precise bursts at specific aim points. Engaging ground targets, particularly fortified positions, required sustained fire to achieve suppression or destruction. The battalion's ammunition consumption in December exceeded their initial allocation by 40%. Additional supplies were requested and provided. German tactical assessments, captured documents from division and corps staffs, reveal institutional awareness of the M16's effectiveness. A report from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, dated January 7, 1945, specifically addressed American half-tracks mounting multiple machine guns. The report warned subordinate units that these vehicles represented a significant threat and should be engaged only with anti-tank weapons or artillery. The report's language was direct. Infantry weapons are ineffective against these vehicles. Do not waste ammunition attempting to suppress them with rifle or machine gun fire. The vehicle's armor is sufficient to resist small arms. The crew is partially protected and can continue engaging even under fire. The volume of return fire makes accurate aimed shots impossible. Units encountering these vehicles should withdraw and call for support. This represented a fundamental shift in German tactical doctrine. Throughout the war, German infantry had been trained to engage enemy armor with whatever weapons were available. Panzerfausts were preferred, but even rifle fire could suppress tank crews, force them to button up, degrade their vision and effectiveness. Against American half-tracks, this aggressive doctrine had proven effective. Half-tracks were thinly armored, and crews were exposed. But the M16 defeated this approach. The firepower was too great. Infantry attempting to engage it suffered immediate casualties. Even successful hits that killed crew members did not stop the vehicle quickly enough. One man could operate the turret alone if necessary. As long as ammunition remained, the M16 could continue firing. For German soldiers who survived encounters with M16 seconds, the psychological impact was lasting. The weapon represented something beyond simple firepower superiority. It represented the fundamental imbalance in the war they were fighting. American forces could deploy vehicles carrying 4 heavy machine guns as standard infantry support. German forces struggled to maintain ammunition supplies for their existing weapons. Oberfeldwebel Klaus Herrmann, the machine gunner who had watched an M16 roll past his position near Malmédy, encountered one 3 days later. His squad had been assigned to hold a crossroads against American probes. They established positions in the ruins of a farmhouse, with good fields of fire and adequate cover. When American infantry appeared, Herman's MG-42 opened fire, forcing them to ground. Then the half-track appeared. Herman recognized it immediately as the same type of vehicle Schmidt had warned him about. He shifted his fire toward it, tracers arcing across the open ground. His rounds struck the vehicle's armor, sparking but not penetrating. Turret rotated toward his position with mechanical precision. Herman stopped firing and dropped behind the stone wall that formed his fighting position. The M16 opened fire. Herman described the experience in a letter written weeks later, after his capture. The wall he sheltered behind was 1/2 meter thick, solid stone construction that had stood for decades. The American fire began to dismantle it. Each impact chipped away stone. Mortar between blocks crumbled. Within seconds he could see daylight through holes in the wall. Dust filled the air, making breathing difficult. The sound was so loud he could feel it in his chest. He remained motionless, pressed against the ground, while the firing continued. His squad members who attempted to return fire were killed. The American vehicle fired for approximately 1 minute, then stopped. Herman waited, then carefully looked over the remains of his wall. The farmhouse his squad had occupied was effectively destroyed. Walls were, holed in dozens of places. The roof had collapsed. 3 of his men were dead. 2 others were wounded. His MG-42 was damaged, the barrel housing struck by a .50 caliber round that had bent the metal. Herman withdrew with the survivors. His squad ceased to exist as an effective fighting unit. He was reassigned to another unit 2 days later. That unit was overrun by American forces on January 15, 1945. He surrendered along with 17 other survivors. In interrogation, he told American intelligence officers that he had been more afraid of their half-tracks with multiple machine guns than of their tanks. Tanks could be hidden from, could be avoided. The half-tracks appeared suddenly and killed everything near them. Other German veterans expressed similar sentiments. The M16 was not the most deadly weapon they faced. Artillery caused more casualties. American armor was more difficult to defeat. American tactical air power was more feared during daylight operations. But the M16 was the most demoralizing weapon because it appeared at the small unit level, where individual soldiers felt they should have some agency, some ability to fight back. Against artillery, soldiers understood they were helpless. Artillery fell from the sky without warning. There was nothing infantry could do except take cover and hope. Against tanks, infantry had Panzerfausts and anti-tank guns, weapons that gave them a chance. Against aircraft, troops could dig in and wait for the planes to leave. But against the M16, they had nothing. Their weapons were ineffective. Their training was inadequate. Their only option was retreat, and retreat meant giving ground, meant failure. The cumulative effect on German morale was significant. Units that encountered M16 seconds repeatedly began to show deteriorating cohesion. Men became reluctant to hold positions when American attacks were expected. Officers reported increasing difficulty maintaining defensive lines. Desertions increased, not dramatically, but noticeably. Soldiers who had fought effectively against other American weapons systems broke when M16 seconds appeared. The German Army's institutional response to the M16 threat was limited by practical constraints. The obvious counter was to deploy more anti-tank weapons at the infantry level. Panzerfausts could destroy an M16 easily. A single hit anywhere on the vehicle would likely disable it and kill the crew. But Panzerfausts were needed for their primary mission, engaging American tanks. Allocating them for use against half-tracks meant fewer weapons available against Shermans. German anti-tank gun units, equipped with 75mm and 88mm weapons, could destroy M16 seconds at range. But these guns were priority targets for American artillery and were constantly being displaced or destroyed. Positioning them to cover against half-tracks meant exposing them to counter-battery fire. The tactical calculus favored using anti-tank guns against armor, not against what were technically anti-aircraft vehicles. Some German units attempted to develop specific countermeasures. Ambush tactics, where Panzerfaust teams would allow M16 seconds to pass into kill zones before engaging, showed some success. But these required discipline and coordination that many units lacked by early 1945. Sniper teams equipped with anti-tank rifles attempted to engage M16 crews at long range, targeting the exposed gunners. This occasionally worked but required skilled marksmen and favorable conditions. The fundamental problem was that Germany lacked an equivalent weapon. German half-tracks existed, primarily the SD, KFZ, 251 series. But they were not equipped with quad-heavy machine gun mounts. German anti-aircraft vehicles typically mounted single 20mm or 37mm automatic cannons. These were effective against aircraft but less useful in the ground support role. The rate of fire was lower, ammunition was less available, and the vehicles were more complex and less reliable. German military industry in 1945 was incapable of producing new weapon systems in meaningful numbers. Factories were being bombed systematically by American and British strategic air forces. Raw material supplies were constrained by the loss of occupied territories and by Allied naval blockade. Transportation infrastructure was degraded, making distribution of finished weapons difficult. The weapons Germany needed to counter the M16 effectively could not be manufactured in time or in quantity. This industrial disparity was the underlying reality that made the M16 so effective and so demoralizing. American forces could deploy specialized vehicles like the M16 as standard equipment because American industry could produce them in thousands. The 413th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion alone had dozens of M16 vehicles. Multiple battalions operated across the European theatre. Each battalion had sufficient ammunition, spare parts, and replacement vehicles to maintain operations continuously. German forces, by contrast, struggled to maintain basic supply levels for existing equipment. Ammunition rationing was constant. Fuel shortages limited vehicle movement. Spare parts were salvaged from destroyed vehicles. New equipment was rare. The appearance of an American vehicle like the M16, purpose-built for a specific tactical role and available in quantity, demonstrated the material imbalance in stark terms. For German commanders at division and corps level, this reality was understood but rarely acknowledged openly. Orders continued to demand that units hold positions, counterattack, defend to the last man. But private communications between officers revealed a growing recognition that the war was lost, that material superiority would eventually grind down German resistance regardless of tactical skill or fighting spirit. The M16 was one small element in this larger pattern. It was not decisive in itself. No major battle turned on the presence or absence of M16 vehicles, but it was representative. It showed that American forces had solutions to tactical problems, solutions that could be mass-produced and fielded widely. German forces had tactical problems without solutions, or with solutions that could not be implemented due to industrial and logistical constraints. By April of 1945, as the war in Europe entered its final weeks, M16 vehicles were operating deep inside Germany. The 413th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion, which had landed in Normandy 11 months earlier, was supporting First Army's advance toward the Elbe River. The battalion's vehicles had fired millions of rounds since D-Day. They had shot down 17 German aircraft in their designed anti-aircraft role. They had engaged German ground forces in hundreds of separate actions. The battalion's maintenance records tell their own story. Barrel changes were frequent due to wear from sustained firing. Ammunition resupply was constant, with trucks delivering 50 caliber rounds to forward positions daily. The vehicles themselves remained mechanically reliable. The White Motor Company half-track chassis, proven in years of service, continued to function. The Maxon turrets, operated continuously in conditions far harsher than design specifications anticipated, maintained their electrical traverse systems and gun mounts. German units facing the final Allied offensives in April encountered M16 seconds, alongside the full weight of American material power. Sherman tanks, artillery battalions with unlimited ammunition, tactical aircraft flying constant support missions, and infantry equipped with every weapon American industry could provide. The M16 was simply one more element in an overwhelming force. For German soldiers at the small unit level, the distinction between being killed by an M16, by artillery, by a tank, or by rifle fire became academic. They were facing industrial warfare waged by a nation whose production capacity exceeded Germany's by orders of magnitude. The specific weapon that killed them mattered less than the systemic reality that they were fighting without adequate equipment, without sufficient supplies, without hope of victory. The nickname Fleischwolf, or Hackfleisch, meat grinder or minced meat, that some German veterans applied to the M16 was accurate but not unique. Many weapons earned similar names. What made the M16 notable was not that it killed efficiently, but that it represented the casual abundance of American military power. A vehicle mounting 4 heavy machine guns, used not for its designed purpose, but because it was available and effective, symbolized the gulf between the two nations' military capabilities. Oberfeldwebel Klaus Herrmann survived the war. He was released from American custody in July of 1946 and returned to Germany. In later years, he was interviewed about his wartime experiences. He spoke about many battles, many weapons, many close calls with death. When asked what weapon he feared most, he did not mention tanks or artillery or aircraft. He mentioned the American half-track with 4 machine guns. He described watching it roll past his position that morning near Malmédy, how he had not understood what he was looking at, how 3 days later he understood completely. He said that when he heard that particular sound, the roar of 450 caliber guns firing together, he knew that everything around that vehicle would die. There was no fighting it with infantry weapons. There was no tactical solution at his level. There was only survival through retreat or through luck. The M16 multiple-gun motor carriage was retired from American service after World War II. Some vehicles saw service in the Korean War, though by then they were largely obsolete. Jet aircraft flew too fast and too high for 50 caliber machine guns to engage effectively. New anti-aircraft systems using radar guidance and automatic cannons replaced the M16 inches the air defense role. The vehicles that survived were eventually scrapped or sold to foreign militaries. Today, a few M16 vehicles exist in museums and private collections. They are displayed as examples of American wartime engineering, of the industrial mobilization that produced thousands of specialized vehicles for specific tactical purposes. Museum placards describe their technical specifications, their service record, their role in the Allied victory. What those placards cannot fully convey is what it meant to be on the receiving end of that weapon. The German soldiers who faced M16 fire understood something that is difficult to communicate across decades of peace. They understood that modern industrial warfare is not primarily about individual courage or tactical skill. It is about production capacity, about logistical systems, about the ability to field overwhelming force across every category of weapons. The M16 was just a half-track with 4 machine guns. It was not technologically sophisticated. It was not particularly well-armored or protected. But it represented American military power at the tactical level in its most direct form, abundant, effective, and utterly unconcerned with conservation of resources. When it opened fire, it did not fire short, aimed bursts to conserve ammunition. It fired sustained streams of 50 caliber rounds because ammunition was available, because resupply was assured, because the industrial system behind it could support that expenditure indefinitely. For German soldiers who had spent years fighting a war of material scarcity, who counted every round and rationed every resource, encountering this kind of firepower was psychologically devastating. It confirmed what many already suspected but had not fully accepted, that they were fighting a war they could not win, against an opponent whose resources were effectively unlimited. The nickname Meat Chopper was not a compliment to American engineering, it was an acknowledgement of brutal reality. The M16 did not require sophistication or tactical brilliance. It simply required a crew willing to point it at the enemy and hold the trigger. Everything else, the ammunition, the spare parts, the fuel, the replacement vehicles when needed, was provided by an industrial system that German forces could not match or counter. That was the true cost of facing the M16, not the casualties it inflicted, significant though those were. But the understanding it forced upon German soldiers, that they were fighting in a war where material superiority had already determined the outcome, where individual actions at the tactical level could delay but not prevent defeat, where even the most basic American support weapons outmatched their ability to respond. When Klaus Herrmann watched that M16 roll past his position in December of 1944, he was looking at the future. 3 days later, when that future arrived with devastating clarity, he learned what thousands of other German soldiers had already learned or would learn in the months ahead. The war was already lost. The only question was how long until the losing was complete. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.